Hi, I'm Dr. Steven Gundry. I'm the medical director of the Center for Restorative Medicine and the International Heart Institute. And on the program today, I'm going to talk about the plant paradox, your microbiome, and why brain fog and how to get rid of it.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your life, in your business, that changes everything. Let me ask you, are you committed to up-leveling your leadership? Well, what about literally upgrading it at a gut level? If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations every Monday and Thursday across the United States. And you can also look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. If you're a regular listener, regular viewer, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the sales C-suite, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that life and leadership pushes hard, and the demands, as they go up, oftentimes it's our bodies that pay the price. But what happens when you've read all the books, you've been to the doctor, you've been exercising, and yet you're still exhausted, you're still overweight, and you're foggy-minded? Is there something that you, and maybe even that God in a white coat, a doctor, is missing? Well, according to our special guest, the answer is yes. My guest today, I am excited to have on, is Dr. Steven Gundry. I'm a big fan, and you'll probably hear me gushing as we go. But Dr. Gundry is a heart surgeon, medical researcher, author of the bestselling The Plant Paradox. He is the host of the Dr. Gundry Podcast. He's a leading expert on lectin-free lifestyle. We'll tell you what that means in a minute, as the key for reversing disease and even helping you with your age. His latest book is called The Longevity Paradox, How to Die Young at a Ripe Old Age. He provides an innovative plan to actually get younger as you age. His fifth book, The Plant Paradox, is upon us. The Plant Paradox is a family cookbook. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the mythbuster of healthy eating, the alchemist of the microbiome, Dr. Steven Gundry!
Whoa! What an introduction.
It's good to have you here, Steven. I'm really excited to have you here. I've read your books. I'm a big fan. I've been a health nut for 150 years. I look pretty good because of it.
Yeah, you and Dave Asprey. Wow.
Yeah, me and Dave were both. Actually, Dave is also a big fan. I know that too. One of the things I like to start my show with is by asking a question that's a little bit off center, which is this. In a world where we are so inundated with famous people and all those kinds of things, and some of us have been on the planet a little bit longer, we're influenced by people. And what I'm interested to know is, who is somebody who's had a major influence on your life, who we likely wouldn't know or maybe even wouldn't suspect, somebody that's really changed the way that you look at the world or look at your life?
Actually, one of the best influences in my life was when I started my career, I was hired at the University of Maryland in Baltimore, and my chief, the chairman, was Joseph McLaughlin, good sort of surgeon, a very amiable fellow. And I was a social climber in academic medicine. I had written more papers as a resident at the University of Michigan, and I was hired as an assistant professor, which is kind of the starting point.
Sure.
And I already had enough papers to be an associate professor. So I went to Joseph McLaughlin. I said, Dr. McLaughlin, when am I going to be an associate professor? And he said, I'll tell you, when you become the best assistant professor that you can be, it'll be time to be associate professor. And I think those simple words really set me on the way and kind of stopped me from saying, how do I climb the ladder? You climb the ladder by being the best at what you're doing at this level. And then it's to move on.
Well, you did become the best. You became the best at the surgery. You became the best at all those kinds of things. But in many ways, that wasn't enough because your own journey, as with many of us, for my listeners, my viewers know that in 1990, I was very successful and I fell off a mountain, got smashed to pieces while free climbing. There are these moments that stop us in our lives. And here you are, a very successful surgeon, and something stopped you.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So, yeah, I was chairman and professor at Loma Linda University, pioneered infant and pediatric heart transplantation.
Wow.
With Mike, who just recently passed away a few months ago, and pioneered minimally invasive heart surgery, invented devices that still are used to keep the heart alive, blah, blah, blah. But I was 70 pounds overweight, despite running 30 miles a week, doing 10Ks on the weekends, going to the gym 1 hour every day at 4 o'clock in the morning, and high blood pressure, high cholesterol, pre-diabetes. I had such bad arthritis in my knees, I wore braces to run. And I was told this was all genetic because my father was the same way. And then I met a guy who I call Big Ed in all my books, from Miami, Florida, 48-year-old gentleman with inoperable coronary artery disease. Everything in his blood vessels was clogged up, and around the United States looking for some idiot to operate on them. And there were various centers where these idiots were, and I was one of these idiots. Big Ed went to these various centers, and everybody turned him down for very good reasons. And so I saw him about 6 months into his journey, and I looked at his angiogram, the movie of his heart, and I agreed with everybody else that there was nothing, you couldn't put bypasses in, you couldn't put stents in, everything's clogged up. And I told him, I don't like to turn people down, but I got nothing for you. And he said, well, just a minute. After this diagnosis, it's been 6 months, and I've lost 45 pounds in 6 months. I've been on a diet. This is a big guy when I met him. He was 265, so that gives you an idea. And he says, I went to a health food store, and I bought all these supplements. And he's carrying this giant bag of supplements. And I said, maybe I did something to my heart. So, I'm scratching my professor beard and going, well, good for you for losing weight, but that, that's not going to do anything in here. And I know what you did with all the supplements. They made expensive urine. And sorry. And he says, well, come on. In your voice, come on, why don't we get a new angiogram, a new movie, and let's see what I did. And I said, okay. So we did. And this guy, in 6 months' time, had cleaned out 50% of the blockages in his heart.
Wow.
Gone. In 6 months. Now, That's impossible. I'm staring at impossible. So
according to traditional medical at that point, what you believed, what was believed, was you can't do that. It doesn't happen. It's just not. The only way to do that is with the surgery, and you were too far gone, so there's no way.
Right. Yeah. We've been taught that, this is a progressive disease, and maybe we can slow it down.
Right.
But you're not going to reverse it. And that was a turning point in my life. And what was really fascinating is Back in the dark ages, as an undergraduate at Yale, we were able to design our own major, and I had a major. It was basically a master's thesis, and the thesis was you could take a great ape, its food supply, and manipulate its environment. And my thesis was you could prove that you would create a human being. And I actually defended my thesis and got an honors, and I gave my thesis to my parents and forgot all about it. So Big Ed starts describing this diet that he's been on. And I go, wait a minute, you're eating what I described in my thesis. And then I said, let me look at those supplements. And I start, going through these things, and I'm very famous for keeping hearts alive in a bucket of ice water for 2 days. And I was putting compounds in the veins and arteries of these hearts to protect them.
Right.
And lo and behold, Big Ed is swallowing a bunch of these things. It never occurred to me to swallow the things. And there he was. And so I actually called my parents and said, hey, do you have my thesis? And they said, yeah. And so thesis, I lost 50 pounds my first year, subsequently another 20 pounds, and have kept it off for 20 years. And I started taking a bunch of supplements. And I started sending my blood work up to the University of California at Berkeley to look at what was happening. And lo and behold, my high blood pressure went away, my high cholesterol went away, my prediabetes went away, my arthritis went away. And so I said, wow, this is interesting, putting my patients who I operated on this program,
right,
so that they could avoid me in the future. I thought that, what a nice guy.
What a nice guy. Let me put myself out of business.
So then, now here's the really stupid thing. And I think your listeners will enjoy this. After about a year of doing this and seeing changes in all my patients, their blood pressure normalized, their diabetes went away. We got them off a lot of meds. I looked in the mirror one Friday morning and I said, I've still got this all wrong. I need to teach them how to eat and not operate on them. And, and it's like, wait a minute, how stupid. Operate on them and then teach them how to eat. No. Teach them how to eat, right, and then you'll never have to operate on them. And if you really want to put yourself out of business, really reduce your income, I suggest you do that.
I think that is contradictory to the, not the Hippocratic Oath, what is it now? Oh yeah, the economic oath.
Yeah, the economic oath. Well, I think Upton Sinclair actually described it best, the famous muckraker of the jungle. And it's a quote I use in a lot of my talks. And he said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something if his salary depends on him not understanding it. And I think there are probably no truer words, particularly in the medical field, because as I try, and my colleagues try to teach traditionally trained MDs about this, it goes directly against our bottom line.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you. I mean, the Plant Paradox and all your work are making sure that people don't end up on the table also means that they don't end up giving into the pharmaceutical industry, etc. You have got to be pissing off a lot of people.
Yeah,
in your industry and in pharmacology and the big pharma industry generally. Yeah,
my wife, fears for my welfare often, and luckily maybe I'm too small a fish right now, but when you think of the billion-dollar industry that big pharma, big food, big medicine, big chemical, these giant multinationals, actually, when you start and look at the board of directors of major hospital systems, major food companies, big pharma, the board of directors look like this. And it's scary. So we'll put it at that. And probably many of your listeners are board of directors of these major corporations.
Well, it's entirely likely, and it's one of the things because oftentimes the people I work with privately are on some of those boards, and it's interesting to me to realize, one of the things I talk about in leadership is solving the fifth problem. And what I talk about with solving the fifth problem is, this is the problem, we can solve that problem. But if you solve that problem, you've not looked at this problem. And if you've solved that problem, you've not looked at this problem. And going in and doing a heart surgery is solving this problem, but it's not going to the fifth level. And what I love about your work is it's going to the fifth level so that you don't end up at the fifth problem, right? So it's dealing with that. But one of the things I find out with a lot of people on these boards is they don't actually realize that what board they're on. They don't realize that, I'm on the board of this, but do you know what they do? Yeah, we do this. No, do you know this about them? So I was talking to one of my clients who's on a board, very powerful company, like global company. And I said, do you know what you do? And he said, yeah, he goes, you like the coffee? And I go, yeah. And you like this? Yeah, I do. Do you know what they do? And he says, yeah, well, they make these. And I said, no, hold on a second. At a fifth level, do you know what they do? And he goes, no. I said, where do I live? And he said, you live in Canada. And I go, that's right. And I go, and you know that we are the lake capital of the world. And he goes, no, I didn't know that. So yeah, well, there's more lakes here than anywhere else. Okay, cool. Do you know that your company steals the water from Indian reservations? And he's like, what? And I go, yeah, native rights gone because they own the water. If there was a drought and everybody who lived in that area, particularly the Native Americans who wanted their water, couldn't have it because it's owned by your company. He's like, I never knew. And for me, it's a metaphor. It's not that, it's not about me doing a big rah-rah. It's a metaphor with our health. And that brings me to this whole piece, which I want to jump into with the title of your first book is The Plant Paradox. But I want to have people grasp what is that paradox, because, we've been thrown, this what was it called? The health pyramid, the eating pyramid,
Yeah.
Right. We were thrown that, and I never
Food
believed
pyramid.
that. I got on this path 40 years ago. So, we were given that, and then we were given pharmacology, and we're given all these things. And then we got the polar response, because the mind works in polarity. And the polar response was you become a grass eating, live on the grains and live off the land, so also, so we've gone from butter is bad to have margarine to margarine is plastic, go back to butter. Walk us through this paradox, because it is important.
Yeah, so the plant paradox is that there are plants that like us, if you will, and are safe to be eaten, and there are plants that absolutely don't like us and don't want to be eaten. And one of the hardest things to understand about plants, and something I actually learned years ago by reading Michael Pollan's first book, The Botany of Desire, is that plants are amazing chemists and alchemists, for that matter, that protect themselves and their offspring, their seeds, by biological warfare against their predators. And their predators happen to be animals, and we happen to be an animal. Their original predator was an insect. What a lot of people don't know is that plants were on Earth long before animals arrived. And so they actually didn't have to move. They didn't have to hide. They didn't have to fight. When insects were a problem, because they were kind of stuck. And so they developed chemicals, if you will, to defend themselves. And one of that classification that I became fascinated with are a group of proteins that are called lectins. Now, some people think I'm saying leptin, which is an anti-hunger hormone. Some people think I'm saying lecithin, which is an emollient that makes chocolate smooth and yummy. But it's lectins. And lectins have been known about since the mid-1800s. We do blood typing using lectins. So lectins are sticky proteins that look for sugar molecules, specific sugar molecules to stick to. And that's actually how we do blood typing. Specific lectins look for specific sugar molecules on the surface of a red blood cell. And depending on which lectin sticks to the surface,
It tells you
you
which
have O or an A or B, okay? So these proteins are used by plants to stick to the lining of our gut wall, which then, believe it or not, produces a cascade of events that causes leaky gut. There's absolutely no question about this. This was worked out by Dr. Fasano from Johns Hopkins a number of years ago. They also stick to sugar molecules on the inside of our blood vessels, and I've recently published lectins are a major cause of atherosclerosis. Stick to sugar molecules in the linings of our joints and produce arthritis. They stick to to prevent nerve transmission. And if you got foggy brain, which you mentioned earlier on, I'm convinced that one of the big drivers of this is lectins. So lectins are present in the hulls of most grains. Even pseudo grains like quinoa are loaded with lectins. Gluten happens to be a lectin, and everybody knows how bad gluten is. Gluten's actually a fairly minor lectin in my scheme of things.
Wow.
They're present in beans. Beans have some of the highest lectin content of any food, and peanuts and cashews are not nuts. They're actually beans.
Yeah.
And peanuts are really good at producing atherosclerosis, believe it or not, sadly. And the nightshade family, potatoes, eggplants, tomatoes, peppers, and even goji berries are all part of the
superfood. Come
I
on
know,
now.
the superfood.
Come on now, Steven. Don't take my superfood away.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was a huge goji berry fan, and I was actually a big chia seed fan, and I was talking to Lauren Cordain, who was the original author of the Paleo Diet, by goji berries and chia seeds, superfoods. He says, "Don't you read the literature?" And I said, "Oh, I do. Look at all the books back here." And he says, "I'm going to send you some papers, and you're going to be shocked." And sure enough, there's human studies about the inflammatory effect of chia seeds and goji berries. And they go, "Oh man, you're taking all my superfoods, away." So, and that's part of the plant paradox. It's like, well, the plant paradox is, okay, who's your friends and who don't you want to be associated with? It's a guide. And some people actually, think I'm anti-nine with me. I'm a tremendous plant predator. But your friend, like in business, you better know who you're dealing with. And there are, what appears to be healthy things that do not have your back and actually do not want you to eat them. In fact, there's more and more evidence that depression and anxiety are caused by leaky gut, by lectins. You can inject lectins in the belly of a rat, and that rat will become so depressed and anxious that it'll sit in the corner of its cage and not explore its environment. And if you think about it from a defense standpoint, if you've got a rat cowering in its hole and not coming out looking for you to eat, that's a pretty good defense mechanism.
It's fascinating because it's one of the things I've loved about your book is I think that today more than any time previously, because of the internet, there is more information available than ever before. And and I always say, if you're a speaker and you're offering, I train people to be speakers, and you're offering information, stop. Because people can get any information they want from Google and never leave their bloody desk or get anything done. So that's not the answer. The answer is to filter the information that you're giving to people. And one of the things I loved about the Plant Paradox is, as I said at the opening, there is so much confusion around what's healthy and what's not. And, the vegetarian diet. I mean, I had a nutrition guy and came on and he talks about the vegetarian diet and he's slamming it. I said, stop. And he said, why? I said, you need to stop because what you're talking about is not true. And he said, well, how can you say that? And I said, because here's the thing. I was a vegetarian about 35 years ago. It was the worst diet in life for me. I was unhealthy. I was the fattest I've ever been. It didn't work for me. But my buddy was on exactly the same program and he was super healthy. So number one, the gut biome is incredibly subjective, and you need to understand that. And there are things that we think are healthy today that weren't healthy yesterday, and vice versa, i.e. margarine and butter, right? I would never eat margarine But, I remember my mom saying, we have to eat this. It's much healthier than the butter. So I love that you break down the information and go, look, here's what it comes down to. And it was fascinating to me because I had studied lectins years ago. And I thought, wow, I was reading this book. I was like, oh my God, this is the stuff I'd forgotten about. That this stuff is bad. I was on the removal of the nightshade diet in 1985, right? When I was reading Pritikin and people like that, right? So, so I was wacky. All my friends were like, this guy's a loon. But this makes it really simple for understanding friends versus foe, because you're not a vegetarian, but you don't eat much meat, do you?
No.
So this is the thing is that, so part of it is everything in moderation, including excess. And part of it is don't ever do this because this just doesn't work for you. Or if it does, if you want to eat it, you can, but you're going to pay the price.
Yeah. Last year, actually, when the Plant Paradox came out, I was speaking at a Harvard conference in neurology and brain health. And I was giving my data and the argument of why lectins. And one of the professors, colleagues, stood up and he said, what's wrong with everything in moderation? Why isn't that the right dietary advice? And I said, hey, I have nothing against everything in moderation. If you want moderate heart disease, moderate brain disease, moderate arthritis, go right ahead. Why would you want that?
You are evil, but I love that. That's one of my favorite things in people. Hold on a second. I'm just going to slap you gently with the truth, and then I'll slap you on the other side a little bit more with the truth. I love that. That's it, right? That is absolutely it. So I want to come back to something that you mentioned earlier, because I think it's so important for people, particularly in people in leadership positions, which is brain fog, right? We've got increased anxiety, we've got increased depression, we've got increased all those things that are really coming to the surface. But one of the things I see with leaders is that they suffer from brain fog, and oftentimes they're not getting enough sleep. There's no doubt about that. That their circadian rhythms are all messed up because of the blue light off a phone or whatever it is. And I have around me all full spectrum lights all the time in my daytime, and I turn them off at least 3 hours before bed so that I can get my circadian rhythms working. But on top of that, I know that I had a swollen gut for years, and I was the healthiest eater of anybody I'd ever met. I know that there are certain things that still affect my gut, and I know that as soon as that gut thing happens for me, I don't think as clearly. So I know there's a connection, and people don't understand that connection. I want you to help them with that, because we think of neurons and we think of the brain, but there's neurons in the gut, and there's a communication between those. Well, there's actually neurons in the heart too, but there's a direct communication between the gut, and hence I have a gut feeling about this, and the brain. Please help our listeners, our viewers understand that.
Yeah, there are more neurons that surround the gut wall than there are in our spinal cord. And that's a lot of neurons. Mm-hmm. The other thing that was really enlightening through the years was there's a giant nerve that goes from our brain down, snakes through our body, called the vagus. And we've always been taught that the vagus nerve is how the brain talks to the heart and to the intestines and tells them kind of what to do.
It's a one-way street.
It's a one-way street. Yep, one-way street. We now know that for every one fiber from the brain going down to the gut, there's actually 9 nerve fibers from the gut going to the brain. Wow. So it's actually a one-way street, basically, from the gut to the brain. Mm-hmm. The stuff that I talk about in the Plant Paradox and also in the Longevity Paradox, which is really, in a way, scary, is back in the good old days, as general surgeons, we used to do an operation for ulcers called a vagotomy, where we would actually cut this nerve. And it was actually pretty good treatment for ulcers when we didn't know any better. But sure. So there were a large number of people who've had a vagotomy, and they've followed these people who had a vagotomy, and it turns out the people who've had a vagotomy have a 50% less chance of developing Parkinson's disease than people who don't have a vagotomy. You go, huh? How's that? Well, we now know that there's two beautiful papers showing that lectins actually climb the vagus nerve and go to the substantia nigra, which is the movement coordination center in the brain, and basically destroy it. And if you cut it, they can't get there. And so you start going, holy cow, and that's amazing. And we know that a number of celebrities have Parkinson's disease because they were, among other things, using smoking interesting things way back when that were contaminated with paraquat. And there's a recent paper showing that paraquat hops on lectins in your gut and travels to the brain, and that's how paraquat gets to the brain and causes Parkinson's. So
tell people about paraquat a little bit, just because we all had our younger years.
Yeah, and was a herbicide and pesticide, and it was sprayed willy-nilly on all sorts of interesting crops, including marijuana, by the way.
Right.
And so just be aware that we now know that how that can affect you is actually climbing on a lectin and traveling up to your brain.
I mean, that brings us to things like, Roundup and GMOs and all those kinds of things, because that's a whole other area.
Yeah, I really want to talk about that. Let me give you a executive example recently. Young man, incredibly successful, 38 years old, lovely wife, clearly had brain fog. And he's 38 years old and top of his game, runs an empire and incredibly successful. You're a listener. And he came to me, and we now have some very, very fascinating, sophisticated tests that can look for leaky brain. There absolutely is such a thing. I got news for you. If you got leaky gut, the odds are you have leaky brain. And also direct antibodies to various parts of the brain, like for MS, for instance. So we did these tests, and lo and behold, to me, he had leaky gut. He was very sensitive to corn, very sensitive to several lectins, and he had markers for an attack on his brain, an inflammatory attack. We put him on the plant. Wife is all in, he's young, she's young. And she said, you are going to do this. I don't care what. I'm going to make all your meals. When you're traveling, you're carrying the meals that I make, and we're going to do this. And so we scheduled the next test for 2 months. And so I see him back. It's been about a month now. And I see him back in the office. They fly in, and he says, I hated you for the first 6 weeks. This is the worst experience I've ever had. He said, I realize now what addict goes through in withdrawal. He said, I hated you. He says, the last 2 weeks, I stopped hating you. But he's a nice guy. And so, I said, well, okay. He says, this better be worth it. And so we get out his new labs. He's no longer, interestingly, he no longer reacts to things like gluten and corn on testing. But the best part is his leaky brain is gone, and this inflammatory marker in his brain is gone. And his wife takes her fist and wham the arm. It's like, yeah, see? And he said, I told you. So, and here's a guy, an executive who has to see things in black and white. And he says, son of a gun, this works. And there you go.
I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is that clarity. I remember years ago, because like I said, I've been doing this for 30 odd years, and I've taught workshops on all kinds of weird and wacky and wonderful things over the years. And back in the early 90s, I was involved in the original men's movement with Robert Bly and people like that. It was wonderful work. And we talked about drugs. We talked about, taking plant medicines and all those kinds of things. And I said, I've done all those things. I fully admit I don't have a problem with that. I admit all those things. I said, but I could tell you that there was no high that I ever felt better than when I felt clean. And that was my word, clean. And they said, what do you mean? I said, it was just this incredible clarity of mind, and it would come spontaneously. And I didn't understand it. It comes spontaneously. Yes, I was meditating every day. Yes, I was working out. Yes, I was doing all those things. But it was this moment of that could last as little as a minute and as much as a couple of days with absolute clarity. And one of the things that I found was it would come at the end of a fast. So talk to us a little bit about fasting, because particularly in the context of, how the gut, the biome, and the brain work.
So fasting, of course, is a part of all great religious traditions. There's not one. Yeah. And our traditional concept was, well, this is teaching you sacrifice and teaching you self-control. And in fact, it has nothing to do with that. When you fast, you essentially starve bacteria in your gut, and there's about 5 pounds of them. There's 100 of them that are pretty much dependent on being fed. And you also, during the fast, stop eating plant lectins or anything else for that matter. Really interesting about fasting, and I talk a lot about this in the Longevity Paradox, is that there's a particular bacteria called Akkermansia muciniphila. Say that 3 times.
Then you get some kind of weird creature that shows up in the mirror.
The
lectin monster shows up.
There's a mucus layer that lines our gut. And our gut, everybody who's listening, is the same surface area as a tennis court inside of us. Wow. That's a lot of surface area. And there's only one cell thick. It's kind of a dumb design, but there's reasons for the dumb design. And there's a layer of mucus that sits protecting this there to, among other things, trap lectins. Lectins look for sugar, mucopolysaccharides, lots of sugar molecules. Yep. It's also there to keep away from the gut wall. They have a space. But there's one bacteria, this little Akkermansia, who loves mucus and eats mucus and thrives in mucus. And the weird thing is, the more mucus that it eats, the more it stimulates our gut wall to produce more mucus. So during a fast, what we see is that this bug is really the only guy who can eat the mucus. And as it eats the mucus, it makes more mucus. So the fasting actually stops leaky gut at its very basic concept.
Basic level. Yeah.
And so you don't anymore have particles of bacteria coming through the wall of your gut. You don't have lectins coming through your gut. And you've actually stimulated stem cells to repair themselves. And so that was why these great religions figured this out. It was actually a health benefit. And now, having said that, we are so full of toxins and heavy metals now that what we have to realize is that you don't just go and say, oh, I'm going to do a 3-day fast. I'm going to do a 7-day fast. Because you are actually our heavy metals and pesticide organopollutants are all stored in our fat cells. Fairly safe as long as they're in our fat cells. That's why a giant swordfish or a giant tuna can look great with toxic levels of mercury, because it's all in their fat. And so these heavy metals and toxins come out of our fat cells when we're fasting. And we have a horrible system of detoxifying heavy metals and pesticides. So just as a tidbit, you gotta take chlorella and activated charcoal during any fast, because you have to bind these things. You have to have enzymes that will support liver function, and I don't want to get too deep in it, but it's fairly easy to do. But please, please, please don't just fast for the sake of fasting. We like 100 years ago when these things weren't in cesspools of toxins.
Well, it's
from our
interesting
environment.
because I can remember even in my, I guess, my very early 20s, being at synagogue and fasting for Yom Kippur and watching people drop. I mean, like collapse. And like, you know, you are not going to collapse from not eating for a day. That's just not enough. And that, I mean, we all know the body can survive very well without enough food and even without water for the day. But that was part of when I started to become healthy and noticing. And I was like, no, actually what's happening is the body's burning the toxins and it's bringing it all to the surface. It's getting released from the fat because the body's burning the fat. And now you're actually poisoning yourself.
Yeah.
People go, well, then I guess I shouldn't fast. No, you shouldn't put the crap in. Again, second level problem. Don't put the crap in, and then you won't have to burn it. Then maybe, no. We'll just deal at the surface level, Dov. Let's keep things at the surface level. It's fascinating. So, I know that on your podcast, the Dr. Gundry podcast, and I'm going to recommend that people go there because you go into a lot more of these things and in a lot more depth, and it's really important for people to have that information, and definitely recommend that they read the book. However, I want to just, there's a lot of languaging around now, and I just want to have people grasp into it around this thing called, which you and I know, which is called the microbiome. It's now become this new cool word. People are talking about the microbiome like they were talking about paleo, and they talk about keto, and now it's microbiome. And all these things are very valuable to know about. But I just look for you people to grasp what that means.
So the microbiome, and I actually prefer a term called the holobiome. The microbiome basically is the bacteria, viruses, and fungi, and even parasites that live in our. And there are at least 10,000 different species. The number increases every year as more of this is discovered. There's a fascinating mycobiome, which are the fungi that are now being applied. But there's also a microbiome in our mouth. There's a microbiome in our nose, on our skin, in our vagina, and actually in a cloud around us. We have a cloud kind of like Pigpen in Peanuts, who had this cloud around him. And just as a fun fact, there's a lot of interesting evidence that the personal space between us is when my bacterial cloud intersects with your bacterial cloud. And and there's also that kissing, which is universal among all humans and also among primates, is a way of exchanging oral bacteria, and the bacteria actually decide if you're compatible with that set of bacteria. That
is a good one.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that makes.
Listen, darling, you are hot, but your microbiome is a bit iffy, and I'm sorry, can't go there.
Yeah, and we actually worked with a couple recently that her vaginal microbiome was killing her husband's sperm, and seriously. And when we changed her vaginal microbiome, she got pregnant like that. And so,
that is
talk about Black Widow. I mean, golly.
Yeah. We're going to cut this off at the base, my friend.
That's right.
You ain't going nowhere.
That's right. You're not.
I got a system to murder the swimmers. You're out.
And, we smart, intelligent humans don't like the fact that plants or single cell organisms think and can control things. But the case on longevity paradox is that you are merely a condominium for these hundreds of trillions of bacteria. And if you're their home, and if you actually keep them happy, they will take care of you as their home. They all spruce things up. But there is a second set of bacteria that I call gang members that have no interest in you, that want to throw rocks through your windows and trash everything. Actually know what the good guys like to eat and what the bad guys like to eat. And if you want the bad guys to take over, the standard American diet is the best way to do it. Simple sugars and fats, man, they love that stuff. So that's why the microbiome is so important. And we know that, for instance, there's an obesogenic microbiome that are capable of extracting a lot more calories from the food you eat than other microbiome. And the other thing that's really scary is we know that those obesogenic bugs literally send text messages to your brain to feed them more of what they like. It's kind of like the show Little Shop of Horrors with Audrey, the blood-sucking plant, going, "Feed me, Seymour, feed me." And we identify now that these text messages exist. So, and it makes really smart people like your listeners go, "Oh, come on, a little one-cell organism is controlling, what I want to eat. Well, get over it." That's what happens.
Yeah, it is fascinating because it's one of the things I've talked about with some of my clients is I think of a particular client who was quite overweight, probably 80, 90 pounds overweight, healthy in the sense of, like you were talking about running and doing exercise and taking care of themselves, but wicked arthritis that has now slowed down the exercise, can't do that, too much pain, like serious pain. Eats healthy. And by the way, eats healthy, not in the traditional sense of healthy, as in also avoids a lot of the stuff that you talk about, away from nightshades and all the rest of it, and still has this problem. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe you need to go find out about your microbiome. So that's the one thing I wanted to ask you about. We're now seeing these new AI tests for testing your microbiome from fecal matter, etc. What's your thoughts on that? Is that a good place for people to go? Is that a way for them to find out a bit more around the subjectivity of their own?
Yeah, the problem that I see, first of all, your microbiome changes on a dime. There's very good evidence that a 3-day kickstart of my program totally changes your microbiome from a obesogenic inflammatory microbiome to a friendly microbiome. 3 days. The problem is, once that 3 days is over and you go back the way you were eating, the microbiome instantly changes back. So I'm, quite frankly, not a big fan of these tests because they give you an instant of time. And there's also some interesting data out of San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco, that most of these tests sample the outside of your stool, and your stool, we now know that bugs have location. There's some bugs that like to be on the outside, and there's some bugs that like to be on the inside. And you may not actually get a full picture. There are others like myself that feel that where the rubber is meeting the road is in the small intestine, where we can't measure yet. There's some new pill capturing devices that look interesting, but we can't measure the bugs in the small intestine. So I personally, all I say is, look, we know what the good eat, and we know what the bad guys like to eat, and carve out the bad guys. They can't compete, gonna eat. Jack LaLanne, who I got to know in his later years, used to have an expression, if it tastes good, spit it out. And all of my associates say, would you stop, saying it makes people think that, the stuff you're trying to get them to eat, tastes bad. Well, what Jack LaLanne was saying is, look, you should be eating for your microbiome. And you shouldn't be eating for this 2 by 3 inch piece of muscle in your tongue. And I think the food that I like people to eat tastes great. And in fact, one of my mottos is, you want to eat food you love, but that loves you back. And that's what we try to do.
And that's what's coming up with your new book, which is
Yeah.
so great because it's a new cookbook, and myself and some of my very good friends who are now converted to Gundryites, as we like to call ourselves, who are now following your eating program. And I actually was just looking at a message from one of my friends, Steve, this morning. He was diagnosed, with a particular type of cancer. I put him in touch with your stuff. He's been following it, and he just loves it. And he's like, we're cooking Gundry. He goes, this is great. He goes, this is really tasty. And he goes, and I would never have thought that. He said, because he's a big meat eater, he goes, I'm still having meat, but way less than I was. And I'm really eating. He goes, and I just actually really find it tasty. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that people, particularly people who live on the traditional American diet, think that healthy is going to taste like twigs and dirt.
Yeah.
Right. And it can, but it's probably not that healthy if it tastes like twigs and dirt. Because my food is, my bride and I eat incredibly delicious food, but we've pretty much on your program. And it's not that we're always on that. Right. And,
Right.
You're going to pay the price. I know. Like, I'm out and I see, like, my weakness is Portuguese tarts. The little, they're so delicious. Yeah. Right? I can't eat wheat. I can't eat the sugar. I can't eat the cream. But you know what? They're delicious. So I'll have one. And then I know, okay, so that night I've got a swollen gut. And, I've got to clean it up tomorrow morning. And I pay the price. But there's consequential thinking to the behavior, rather than, why is my belly hurting all the time? And that's what I loved about your book. It's what I love about the idea of your cookbook of coming, people can actually say, okay, this is not practical. Yes, it actually is. And a lot of the recipes are actually quite simple.
Yes. And that's what I did with the new book, which will be out November 19th, The Family Cook. I take care of a lot of kids. In fact, just saw a 13-year-old young man from the Bay Area yesterday in the office who has just unbelievable multiple allergies, is on immunosuppressants, it has the worst asthma, is on inhalers. I mean, he's just kind of skin and bones at 13. And this lovely kid has, amazing leaky gut. He's got an autoimmune disease. And in the 3 months since we've been working with him, his markers for his autoimmune disease are dramatically decreasing. We're not there yet. His leaky gut markers are decreasing. And, his medications that he's on have been dropped by, he's 3/4 dose of what he used to be, dose of what he used to. And here's a 13-year-old. And, he's got peer. And so I wrote this cookbook really for these kids
Sure.
and for their parents, who, everybody's working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and, soccer moms are carrying kids to 14 school activities, after school activities. So a lot of it's Instant Pot, a lot of it's quick, easy. And again, it's foods you love, but love you back. But it's exciting to see, his parents realize, look, what kind of fate is my son going to have on these immunosuppressants? And I know immunosuppressants because I was a transplant surgeon. I helped him. So no, I keep telling people who are on these immunosuppressants, you don't have a heart or a kidney transplant. What the heck are you doing on these things? And, a little light bulb goes out in their head and goes, yeah, why am I on these things? And
it's crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we're doing are just crazy because we are so driven to fix symptoms rather than deal with problems. Again, that 5th level of problem solving, such a big issue. Stephen, this has been an amazing conversation. I personally would enjoy going for another couple of hours, but I know we're both busy guys. I want to make sure that people know more about you, where they can find out more about you. And then I want to just go to a quick lightning round. So please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you and all your, because you have an enormous wealth of resources for people to connect with you.
So they can go to drgundry.com. I have a supplement company, gundrymd.com. I've got 2 YouTube channels. I cast. I hopefully every time you turn on your computer, I'm waving at you somewhere.
You are on mine. Your ads go well.
And you can, I have 4 New York Times bestsellers, which you can find wherever books are sold. They're always on the shelves. It's been the Plant Paradox been translated to 36 languages. It's a worldwide movement, and I delight in hearing from Lithuania on how somebody has turned their life around. So.
Yeah, you've succeeded when you've changed people's lives in Lithuania, my friend.
There's even a Lithuanian edition.
Well, I have some distant relatives who are actually from that part of the world, so I'm sure.
All right, tell them to look it up.
Okay, well, and so drgundry.com is the central place, though. That's the central hub. And that's what we'll definitely make sure that everybody knows about that in the show notes. So let's go into our lightning round. So what's a guilty pleasure? I mean, we've been talking about you and about all these things. So what's a guilty pleasure for Dr. Steven Gundry?
Pizza. That.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
A pizza in Italy.
A pizza in Italy. Oh, that's a pizza in Italy. That is a pizza.
And the reason for that is, luckily, Roundup is not very prevalent in Europe yet. It will be because it's approved by the EU, unfortunately, thanks to Bayer, who now owns Monsanto. But that's my guilty pleasure. In fact, that's the only reason I go to Italy. No.
That's an expensive pizza. Where are you going? I'm going to Italy. What for? Pizza. There was actually a thing that came out in the Nairobi government recently that they were sending out to pizza, but they were sending to England. People were flying the pizza from England to Nairobi. If you're going to fly for a pizza, go to Rome, not England. England, if you want a good curry, maybe. But come on. That is fabulous. In a parallel universe, what do you do?
In a parallel universe, what would I do? I would be an architect.
Fascinating. That's very interesting. That seems like a million miles from where you are. Tell us why that's such a pull for you.
My grandfather was an architect and a home builder, kind of a hobby. And I was making model airplanes and designing model airplanes and building things. And in a way, I became a children's heart surgeon because you build these hearts basically from scratch. There aren't any instructions. So I think I'd be an architect in a parallel universe.
That's fascinating. That is really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And as we finish up, I would love for you to tell our listeners, our viewers, one simple, practical piece of direction that they can go take action on in the next, preferably 24 hours, that they can go do outside from buying the Plant Paradox or one of the Paradox books. So which I do recommend.
the actionable item in the next 24 hours is stop eating all grains, including healthy grains like quinoa or buckwheat. Just stop, and all sorts of good things happen.
As simple as that.
Simple as that.
And yet, for so many people, they don't realize how much grain is in everything, just like they don't realize how much corn is in everything.
Yeah, over 70% of the carbon atoms in the average North American is from corn. Only 5% of the carbon atoms in a European is from corn. And we have to remember that none of us ate corn until 500 years ago. This is a modern lectin-containing food, and it has no business in our diet.
That's fascinating. That really is. Well, Steven, this has been a pleasure and an honor. I want to thank you so much for this. Hope you'll stay with us to the end. It was a joy, my friend. It really was. And I really feel like this is powerful and important information for us to get out there, particularly, as I said, for busy leaders who, are finding they're dragging their ass and dragging their mind around. And this is a great way to get that clean and clarity that's so important. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. And you can chat about this episode or any past episodes with other conscious leaders inside of our Facebook and our LinkedIn groups. Just go look for Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. To find out more about me, Darv Varon, and how you can hire me as a strategist for your organization or a speaker, you can go to fullmontyleadership.com/speaking or fullmontyleadership.com/consulting. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how the fogginess in your mind may have everything to do with what you put in your mouth. Remember, as Dr. Gundry just said, eat the foods you love that love you back. I'm Darv Varon, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.